4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition sequence start and liftoff of the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket.
So when I was young, I didn't really know what I was going to do when I got older. People kept asking me, but then eventually I thought that the idea of inventing things would be really cool. And the reason I thought that was because I read a quote from Arthur C. Clarke, which said that a sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and that's really true. If you go back, say 300 years, the things that we take for granted today would be you'd be burned at the stake for. Being able to fly, that's crazy. Being able to see over long distances, being able to communicate, having effectively with the internet a group mind of sorts, and having access to all the world's information instantly from almost anywhere on the earth. This is stuff that really would be magic, or would be considered magic in times past. In fact, I think it actually goes beyond that, because there are many things that we take for granted today that weren't even imagined in times past. They weren't even in the realm of magic. So it actually goes beyond that. So I thought, well, if I can do some of those things, basically if I can advance technology, then that's like magic, and that would be really cool. I also had sort of a slight existential crisis, because I was trying to figure out what does it all mean? Like, what's the purpose of things? And I came to the conclusion that if we can advance the knowledge of the world, if we can do things that expand the scope and scale of consciousness, then we're better able to ask the right questions and become more enlightened, and that's really the only way forward. So I studied physics and business, because I figured in order to do a lot of these things, you need to know how the universe works, and you need to know how the economy works, and you also need to be able to bring a lot of people together to work with you to create something, because it's very difficult to do something as an individual if it's a significant technology.
There are a lot of negative things in the world. There's a lot of terrible things that are happening all over the world, all the time. There are lots of problems that need to get solved. There's lots of things that are miserable and kind of get you down. But life cannot just be about solving one miserable problem after another. That can't be the only thing. There need to be things that inspire you, that make you glad to wake up in the morning and be part of humanity. That's why we did this. This guy called Tsiolkovsky, one of the early Russian rocket scientists, the great saying, "Earth is the cradle of humanity, but you cannot stay in the cradle forever." It is time to go forth, become a star-faring civilization, be out there among the stars, expand the scope and scale of human consciousness. I find that incredibly exciting. That makes me glad to be alive. I hope you feel the same way. Now is the time to take risk. You don't have kids. As you get older, your obligations increase. So and once you have a family, you start taking risk not just for yourself, but for your family as well. It gets much harder to do things that might not work out. So now is the time to do that. Before you have those obligations. So I would encourage.
Like, there are many more ways to fail than to succeed. So you have to explore. Particularly like for a rocket, there's like 1,000 ways a thing can fail, and like one way it can work. So you could have a lot of rocket failures to explore all the ways in which you could fail. But I do think that one great thing about the Silicon Valley is that failure is not a big stigma. So it's like if you try hard and it doesn't work out, that's okay. Like, you can learn from that and do another company, and it's not a big deal. And I think that's really one of the great things about Silicon Valley.
Really liking what you do, whatever area that you get into, given that even if you're the best, there's always a chance of failure. So I think it's important that you really like whatever you're doing. If you don't like it, life is too short. If you like what you're doing, you think about it even when you're not working. I mean, it's something that your mind is drawn to. And if you don't like it, you just really can't make it work, I think.
On signal over noise, a lot of companies get confused. They spend money on things that don't actually make the product better. For example, at Tesla, we've never spent any money on advertising. We put all of the money into R&D and manufacturing and design to try to make the car as good as possible. I think that's the way to go. For any given company, just can keep thinking about, are these efforts that people are expending, are they resulting in a better product or service? And if they're not, stop those efforts.
When I interview someone to work at the companies, would be to ask them to tell me about the problems that they worked on and how they solved them. And if someone was really the person that solved it, they'll be able to answer multiple levels. They'll be able to go down to the brass tacks. And if they weren't, they'll get stuck. And then you can say, oh, this person was not really the person who solved it, because anyone who struggled hard with a problem never forgets it.
In company, or if you're joining a company, the most important thing is to attract great people. So either join a group that's amazing, that you really respect, or if you're building a company, you've got to gather great people. I mean, all a company is a group of people that have gathered together to create a product or service. And so depending upon how talented and hardworking that group is, and the degree to which they are focused cohesively in a good direction, that will determine the success of the company. So do everything you can to gather great people if you're creating a company. Depending upon how well you want to do, and particularly if you're starting a company, you need to work super hard. So what does super hard mean? Well, when my brother and I were starting our first company, instead of getting an apartment, we just rented a small office and we slept on the couch. And we showered at the YMCA, and we're so hard up we had one computer, so the website was up during the day, and I was coding at night, 7 days a week, all the time. And I sort of briefly had a girlfriend in that period, and in order to be with me, she had to sleep in the office. So work hard, like I mean, every waking hour. That's the thing I would say particularly if you're starting a company. And I mean, if you do simple math, say like, okay, if somebody else is working 50 hours and you're working 100, you'll get twice as much done in the course of a year as the other company.
That whatever you're doing is a great product or service. It has to be really great. And I go back to what I was saying earlier, where if you're a new company, I mean, unless it's like some new industry or new market that, if it's an untapped market, or then you have more ability to, the standard is lower for your product or service. But if you're entering anything where there's an existing marketplace against large entrenched competitors, then your product or service needs to be much better than theirs. It can't be a little bit better, because then you put yourself in the shoes of the consumer, and they say, why would you buy it as a consumer? You're always going to buy the trusted brand unless there's a big difference. So a lot of times, entrepreneur will come up with something which is only slightly better. And it can't just be slightly better. It's got to be a lot better. And first of all, I'd say starting a business is not for everyone. So generally, starting a business, I'd say number one is have a high pain threshold. There's a friend of mine who's got a good saying, which is that starting a company is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. Okay, that's generally what happens, because when you first start a company, there's lots of optimism and things are great, and then so happiness at first is high. Then you encounter all sorts of issues, and happiness will steadily decline, and then you'll go through a whole world of hurt. And then eventually, if you succeed, and in most cases you will not succeed, and Tesla almost didn't succeed, came very close to failure. then if you succeed, then after a long time, you will finally get back to happiness.